Truth, logic, action, power. It's the GreggHoush Show here on New Revolutionary Radio. From the Leonard School in Malden, Massachusetts, Gregg and company are here to bring a sense of ethics to your news. Whether it's politics, activism, or current events, we always seek to inform and never to deceive. Let's start the show.
Hello and welcome to episode 55 of the GreggHoush Show. Sitting here with me is Mac. We are recording for the first time on a Sunday due to all kinds of unforeseen circumstances.
Yeah, interesting scheduling snafus this week.
But here we are. So there is a lot to talk about. Most of it thanks to Rudy Giuliani.
Seriously, this week has just been insane. Even by the insane standards of the last 2 years.
I mean, I just keep expecting it to be mostly about, Trump, Giuliani, Pruitt, all these actors. But we also have some good stuff from the Democrats this week, too.
Oh, yeah. They've been up to some nice
The Democratic Party loves democracy.
Yeah, big on that.
Big on democracy. Hint.
Hence in the name.
Yeah. So Giuliani gets brought in, and he's joined the legal team for Trump, and he's decided that he's going to talk to all the reporters and say all the dumb things.
It's mind-boggling. He just keeps. It was bad enough. The first day, 12 hours after he joined the team, he was already saying things where lawyers are going into interviews afterwards. I don't know what on earth made him think that was a good idea. He just fucked Trump's own legal defense. And then even after that, he keeps going on news shows and talking. It's like a worse version of Sam Nunberg or the Mooch or one of them.
He opens up with on Comey, quote, "He fired Comey because he would not, among other things, say that he was not a target of the investigation. He's entitled to that. Hillary Clinton got that, and he couldn't get that, so he fired him." And I mean, there's a lot more to all of those quotes, but just the idea that he outright says it's because he wouldn't say he was not a target. Lots of double negatives going on in these statements, but
an admission of obstruction of justice.
Yep. And then he claims that Trump reimbursed Michael Cohen for the $130,000 paid to Stormy Daniels, contradicting previous assertions by both Trump and Cohen.
And then the next day, Trump then said that he didn't know Giuliani didn't know what he was talking about. And then Giuliani ended up having to issue a statement about how it was on Friday where he said that his initial comments did not reflect, quote, "my understanding of the president's knowledge, but instead my understanding of these matters."
Yeah, like he's basically saying, no, it happened. The president might not have known it happened.
Yeah, and that's literally he's actually gone on to say more things on the subject.
He keeps talking. It's freaking great.
It's amazing. What does he think he's trying to accomplish here? I don't understand.
Yeah.
Whose side is he on?
I mean, the repayment is probably legal under FEC rules. It's mind-blowing what he's doing on that front. And then Giuliani claims, quote, "it's not campaign money, no campaign finance violation, funneled through a law firm, and then the president repaid it," which, of course, shows evidence of intent to hide the source, making it knowing and willful.
Also, it being repaid makes it a loan, which is literally in the text of the law about campaign finance, about what you're not allowed to be doing there. Because a loan is counted as a donation to the campaign and therefore is subject to all of the election limits and reporting requirements. And so if they didn't report it and it's $130,000, which is way above the limit of what a single person's allowed to donate to a campaign, that's pretty straightforward.
It's mind-blowing. And then, of course, he goes on this week with George Stephanopoulos, this morning, actually, and just continues to talk.
Oh, and makes things somehow even worse. I think my favorite part of this was the part where he was talking about whether he was asked if Trump would plead the fifth under the questions that the special counsel wanted to ask him. And he replied, quote, "How can I ever be confident of that when I'm facing a situation with the president and all the other lawyers are, in which every lawyer in America thinks he would be a fool to testify? I've got a client who wants to testify." I cannot
He
parse.
just called the president a fool.
Yeah, I cannot parse any way to read that is not him saying you would have to be a fool to want to do this. This guy wants to do this.
So on national television, he just called the president a fool. Like, as direct as you really can in his position.
Yeah, without just outright saying that guy is a fool. No, he split it into two separate clauses and then said that exact thing. You would have to be an idiot to do X. Also, this guy wants to do X. But that was hardly the only quote that was like gold there. There was him saying, quote, "They're trying to trap. You couldn't put a lawyer on the show who wants to keep his law license to tell you he should testify. I wouldn't be an attorney if I did that. I live in some kind of unreal fantasy world that everyone tells the truth." I mean, just an admission that Trump would perjure himself outright. That is literally what that is.
Yeah, I mean, please keep talking, Giuliani. Please, for the love of God, keep talking. This is absolutely amazing. You know, I mean, he says he's still learning. He's been on the case for 2 weeks. You know, it's just like,
look, he's not an expert on the facts yet, according to him. That's
not
a
an
direct
expert
quote.
on
I'm not an
anything.
expert on the facts yet. I'm getting there.
Stop opening your mouth is what, you know, anyone should be telling him right now. But don't keep talking. This is hilarious.
Also, I liked that we've seen in the past week, not just Giuliani, but a number of people, mostly on Fox News, but also Giuliani, make statements to the effect that, you know, the president doesn't have to comply with subpoenas or anything like that. And basically literally the only legal remedy to which the president can be subject is impeachment. Because this is literally something that the Supreme Court addressed with Nixon in 1974 when they tried to subpoena the tapes from the secret recordings in his office. You know, the thing that promptly resulted in legal battles that the president then resigned to avoid being impeached over. But expressly, I mean, let's just quote from the proceedings of the case. Nixon's attorney, part of his argument was actually, quote, "The president wants me to argue that he is as powerful a monarch as Louis XIV, only 4 years at a time, and is not subject to the processes of any court in the land except the court of impeachment," end quote. That's literally the argument that they made. Now, what did the Supreme Court have to say about this in response? Well, here's a few excerpts. Quote, "Neither the doctrine of separation of powers nor the need for confidentiality of high-level communications, without more, can sustain an absolute unqualified presidential privilege of immunity from judicial process under all circumstances." They then proceed to go on to say that, quote, "The impediment that an absolute unqualified privilege would place in the way of the primary constitutional duty of the judicial branch to do justice in criminal prosecutions would plainly conflict with the function of the courts under Article 3. In designing the structure of our government and dividing and allocating the sovereign power among 3 co-equal branches, the framers of the Constitution sought to provide a comprehensive system, but the separate powers were not intended to operate with absolute independence." And then proceed to lay out exactly why absolute presidential immunity under the idea of just the president is immune to these things rather than the president has very specific military or diplomatic reasons of national security why these things shouldn't be revealed would absolutely infringe the ability of the courts to do their most fundamental job. Like the Supreme Court was very explicit about this in multiple places in a case literally of the United States against the president of the United States. How could you then go on and be like, oh, no, like this is the president totally, that argument still holds.
Yeah, no.
What?
Well, you can do that if you're Giuliani and you don't know what you're doing at all.
Yes. And apparently not just Giuliani.
Right, but you just have to remember that Giuliani was in power in, you know, New York, not due to intelligence, not due to his ability to really, you know, just talk his way through any situation. No, not like a lot of the other people in power in New York in these big powerhouse cities. He was in power because he did whatever the rich people who put him there told him to. He is a puppet and an idiot, and now they're giving him a microphone.
Now, the weird part,
Now we
though,
get to see how dumb he is.
I mean, admittedly, it has been a long time since it was true, but he was at one time an actual practicing lawyer and, in fact, an actual federal prosecutor. So, like, you'd think, sure, it's been like 30 years since any of that was the case. But you'd imagine that like he'd have some sort of basic understanding of the law, and then he just comes out and says,
"Are we looking at Alzheimer's, dementia?
Right?
Like, what are we looking at here?
Seriously.
Has senility set in already? Like, how?
I don't know, but like those. Like,
if there was an intelligent
questions.
man there, it's not there anymore.
I mean, I never really got the impression that he was, a genius or anything, but he didn't seem like he was this dumb.
You don't have to be a genius to pass the bar.
No, very clearly not. But
see Michael Cohen.
see the existence of Cooley Law School.
Yes.
For those of them that pass the bar.
So, past Giuliani here, because we're just going to get more out of him every day, it seems, which is glorious. Thank you, Rudy.
Yeah.
The Democratic Party has shown their commitment to democracy in multiple ways in the last few months.
Oh, just all over the place. And even when it's only like, sure, we hear about a case in, one state, Colorado or New York or Texas, or in this case, we heard stories of all three, but like, yeah, it's just this one congressional case usually, or sometimes even a smaller race that we hear about this. But then you look at like what they're actually saying in the background to these people, and they're just openly admitting that, the Democratic Party actively does this all the time.
Yeah.
I mean,
the DCCC specifically putting up party hardliners who are not progressive in any way, who work for the system, and anytime someone really progressive looks like they might have a shot at getting a seat, they come in and attempt to replace them with a candidate that's more in their control, is the best way to put it.
Yeah. I mean, like, look at what happened in Texas. They didn't even have a specific preferred candidate, as far as I know, per se.
They just didn't want the current person to win.
Yeah, they didn't want Laura Moser to win. There was two other candidates they were more okay with. So they outright, on their own website, published opposition research on Laura Moser.
Who was running for the Democratic seat.
In a primary.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. And then we had a case where the number 2 House Democrat went to a candidate in Colorado and just outright said, you need to drop out.
And you wonder why they don't have a majority in anything currently? I mean, they might be changing that here soon, but that's not due to their work.
Them,
that's not because of them. That's in spite of them. It's because of the GOP's, horrible handling of their majorities.
Of course. And I mean, the thing that blows my mind about this is because, the rallying cry, the refrain we always hear about why they do this is it's all about pragmatism. They need candidates who can actually win these seats, blah, 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 right? It's always what we hear, invariably, without exception. Well, you look at the case that we heard out of New York, up in Syracuse, where they had an actual progressive that would have won. Syracuse is a very democratic city.
Dana Balter.
And didn't even have real competition running. Dana Balter is not only, is not just some random schmo off the street either. Professor of public policy and the leader of one of the largest invisible chapters. So it wasn't a competitive primary in the first place, and they had a solid candidate who would have won. And the DCC came in and recruited someone specifically to run so that they could get a more establishment friendly. And the person they recruited was someone who had recently lost the mayoral race there, while all of the activists that were local supported Dana Balter. And so the DCCC angered all of the local activists by undermining all of their work.
Everyone who helps get the vote out, everyone who does the door-to-door canvassing, everyone who runs the local political meetings, all were very unhappy with this.
And these are the people that literally know the politics. They say all politics is local, and that is very, very true. And these are the people that know the local politics.
And the DCCC just comes in and stomps on their candidate, Dana Balter, and tries to replace Dana Balter with Juanita Perez.
Yeah. So, this is just what they do repeatedly. And they ignore when the local activists are like, nah, but we've been supporting this person. We've done all the work. Like, this is a good candidate. And you just came in and shat all over all of the work we did.
Yeah.
Like, no wonder the Democratic Party is in such a fucking mess.
Yeah, they don't support the locals. They don't work hard to actually do anything on the local level. I mean, if here in my own city, if you look at the Democrats in Malden, Massachusetts, their complete setup for the local Democratic committee is built in a way where it's nearly impossible for young people to get on the committee. It's nearly impossible for you to remove one of the older, more establishment types off of the committee. And you in the end just show up, realize that this is just some kind of social gathering for old people that they do that doesn't have much to do with politics at all. And they don't want you kids with your ideas anywhere in the room.
And that you have to like be part of that social club in order to, for a long time, and, you know, get your in with them just in order to be able to get to the real meetings where they're making those decisions.
Yeah. And you know, then you look at the Republican side. And you look at the GOP helping to fund and operate things like the Young Republicans clubs and the youth-oriented Republican clubs that happen in every major city. And you look at their local city committees in the cities where they need them, and they're not only run really professionally with good data backing them, but I mean, half of them are even like catered, and you know, and you go to these Democratic ones, and you're lucky if they've gotten some local place to give them some space to use. We have in my office here, we have meetings for some of the local Democratic or you know left leaning you know types, just because there's no other space for them to have. And you look at the Republican stuff, and the parties themselves, even down to the local city level, in small cities, are funding their space, are helping them bring food in, are helping them learn operations, are helping them canvas, are giving them software tools, data. Like, the Democratic Party has lost everything it's lost due to its own ineptitude. It gave up on local.
And the weird part is that, like, there's such a mismatch between the idea that, you know, the national party should feel free to intervene in all these local races. It should be organized top down, where these national political leaders understand the situation and should try and turn things steer things the direction they see fit. While at the same time, they want this to be this notion of this grassroots party where everyone organizes everything for themselves. Like, there's this huge fundamental conflict there where they want all the power, but they don't want any of the responsibility of actually making anything successful, and they're willing to blame everyone else for all their failings.
I still am of the opinion that you know, you take all the people setting up Indivisibles, you take all the people setting up Our Revolution chapters, and you start to take all of them, and if you can consolidate them behind a different idea than trying to steal the Democratic Party from the ineptitude at the top, and you know, there might be some kind of an interesting way to start heading towards a third party here. Because you've got people now in every major city of the country running these chapters of these small little progressive groups. And, you know, the Democrats they like to talk about being progressive, but, you know, you can watch their actions and see that they're not.
Of course. I mean, I am all in favor of the idea of doing something that removes some of the power of both of the existing parties, because one of them is garbage and the other one is far, far, far worse than that. But they've said those parties literally are what make the rules about how you get on the ballots. It is all but impossible in many parts of the U.S. for a third party candidate to be organized enough and have the resources they need to get on the ballot. In fact, usually, if you're not part of a major party, in many places, there is a higher bar for getting on the ballot in the first place, where you have to get way more signatures, and you know you don't have a party apparatus to help you gather those signatures in the first place. So you effectively have a shorter period of time to organize all of that, because it has a very specific window in which you have to do all that. You have to pay sometimes a larger filing fee. You have more paperwork burdens to deal with, and then you have to have more signatures as well. Like, it's just outright written to keep other
it's
people
built
off.
for it. But, you look at the time period we're in right now, and we do have a lot of interesting stuff going on, like real progressive groups starting to form in every major city, having their own meetings outside of the Democratic Party meetings, outside of the Democratic Party apparatus. And sure, in the end, a lot of the Our Revolution and indivisible groups end up at the Democratic caucuses, and they claim to be, blue and on the left and with the Democrats. But at the same time, they're meeting on their own and not going to the Democratic events, other than the big party events where you have to in order to get candidates through.
Right.
And that gives you, I think it gives us, as a nation, an interesting kickstart. I mean, you've got people on the ground in every major city. I mean, fundraising can be done, organization can be done, software can be put together with this level of, people. I mean, just, an OR Malden here and Our Revolution Malden in our town, the person who's currently in charge of it is a software developer. I mean, I'm pretty positive there's going to be a lot of them in this group you could pull together. And I think that's interesting. I think the other interesting stuff we have going on is, Connecticut's House of Representatives voted 77-73 to advance a bill which would add Connecticut to the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. And, the National Popular Vote definitely cuts out a lot of the local power plays that the Democrats and the Republicans have in place to keep third parties down.
Well, at least for the presidential election, it
exactly.
doesn't address congressional elections and stuff.
Sure, but it's another piece of the puzzle. Yeah. And then you look at ranked choice voting, like here, yes. Voters' Choice MA in Massachusetts. They are doing a really solid job of getting ranked choice voting out there and heard. And, I think there's we're at this point where a push could be made, a valid attempt could be tried here to do this. And I'd love to see it happen.
Yeah. I mean, to give some credit where it is due, with the National Popular Vote bill in Connecticut and the Connecticut House of Representatives, the bill was supported by all but 3 Democrats, while all but 1 Republican opposed it. So I think we know which party, is at least sometimes willing to take the right side of things. And the
Democrats are only supporting it because every time the vote shows up and the vote is counted as a whole, they win.
Of course.
So, I mean, when you take the entire vote...
It is certainly cynical and self-serving on their part, but the fact of the matter is, when there is any sort of vote that advances these sorts of things in the U.S., and it's true to a large degree, like the Democratic Party in Maine hasn't been opposing ranked choice voting there, whereas the Republican Party there is actively trying to prevent that from actually going into effect.
Because it will unseat them from a lot of seats.
They'll just be gone.
Be decimated.
Yeah, but yes, there's certainly some self-serving and it's not like it's simply because they believe it's the right thing to do. That's why Democrats support it. But when someone does, it is the Democratic Party. So I'll give them,
Give them that credit. Sure.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting one. And again, if in your state, in your city, in your area, ranked choice voting or the idea of the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact are coming up or aren't up yet, raise them or join the fight, because these are very important and can only help to strengthen, what we have here and add more voices to the arguments instead of just the false dichotomy of Republicans versus Democrats. So, that's an interesting one. And the Democrats are just continuing to shut out all the progressives. So the progressives should maybe organize on their own.
Yes.
And then, of course, back to Trump, because there's just so much. You know?
Man, just like everything this week was just so many revelations on like 100 different topics.
So, Trump threatened Rosenstein this week, Assistant Attorney General there.
Via like tweet and like in another speech and like twice, like 2 or 3 times. And we finally got Rosenstein replying by making a public statement saying, pretty straightforward, quote, "There have been people that have been making threats publicly and privately against me for quite some time, and I think they should understand by now, the Department of Justice is not going to be extorted. Any kind of threats that anybody makes are not going to affect the way we do our job. We have a responsibility and we take an oath. That's the whole point." end quote.
And that's not wrong.
Yeah, no, I don't necessarily agree with a lot of things that the DOJ does or things that prosecutors do or say, or really,
Sure.
I think a lot of the time our legal system is on the wrong side of things. But that fundamental principle there, like, no, I'm 100% in agreement. My objections are more about how they carry out their job a lot of the time.
Carmen Ortiz.
Yes, that's a great example of why I have those objections.
So yeah, Rosenstein's response there was just right on point. And a potential subpoena was revealed by good old John Dowd.
Yes.
And,
now that he's no longer on the Trump legal team.
Early March, Mueller raised the possibility of subpoenaing Trump if needed.
Yeah. Although it was nice that just like a day or two after we got that story, we got the story on Thursday that the Mueller team had filed a request for 70 blank subpoenas in the case about Paul Manafort, all regarding court appearances on July 10th. So apparently they have a whole lot of people they want to bring in to talk.
That is glorious. Take that man down.
Yeah, that should be interesting.
And Mueller's been talking to Michael Caputo.
Yeah, it's very interesting what happened there because, of course...
Former communications aide for the Trump campaign.
Yeah, and I mean, what he said on CNN afterwards was interesting. And it was kind of interesting to contrast it with what we've seen from a lot of other people in the Trump orbit. Because, of course, we've been hearing a lot in the last week about them talking, oh, there's no collusion. They're not even, there's some sort of fishing expedition. They're just looking into finding anything they can, blah, blah, blah. And then Caputo gets interviewed by Mueller and goes on CNN. And he still acts like, oh, I haven't done anything wrong and blah, blah, blah. But he is very clear that Mueller's team is really focused on Russia collusion. And said some things like, quote, the Senate and the House are net fishing. The special counsel is spear fishing. They know what they are aiming at and are deadly accurate, end quote. And they also talk about how they have all of their texts and know more about what was going on in the campaign than literally anyone that was part of the campaign.
Yeah, at this point, everyone else's memory is what they have, and they don't have much in the way of documents, whereas Mueller's sitting there on just stacks of documents like, no, I know exactly what you were doing on this day at this time. You might not remember, but... I have
the printout from, the counterintelligence operatives that were watching that.
Yeah. And that's how they keep catching him in lies, too. It's that, I mean, I can understand, sitting there being interviewed about a specific day and time from, a year ago and getting little bits wrong.
Of course.
But Mueller's team, they have facts.
Yeah. And I mean, it's very important to note that, you can be wrong and not be perjuring yourself.
Yeah, you can totally say, I mean, this is my memory of it, but I don't know how good my memory is, but this is kind of what I remember, so it's what I can give you.
I mean,
and you can talk like that to prosecutors.
Yeah, absolutely.
You just can't say this is exactly what happened, 100%. I'm telling you a fact.
I mean,
and then lie to them. That's a little off.
You can actually be insisting that you are recounting the truth and get little details wrong. And then if it comes up later, be like, oh, I guess my memory was wrong about that.
Right.
That's not perjury. It has to be materially false and willfully false. And that's actually a fairly hard bar for them to prove.
Yeah. Especially with, us humans being unbelievably flawed creatures and our memory being pretty bad.
That being said, in these cases, I don't think they're going to have much trouble proving both elements because everyone involved appears to be a moron that's willing to go on CNN and tell them about how they lied. And meant to lie the whole time.
And we got more revelations about good old Mifsud here, the Maltese professor, Joseph Mifsud, who went missing.
Yeah. I mean, man, we're just getting little drips and drabs on that one. Every month or so, we hear some new detail where we're like, oh, well, that's more and more suspicious.
He was invited to Moscow by the Russian Council of International Affairs, a think tank closely linked to the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And he had a visa on October 4th, 2017 for that. And then a few weeks later, court documents identifying Mifsud's role in the Trump-Russia events would be unsealed.
And of course, he was last publicly seen on October 31st of 2017 in Rome.
A few weeks after that, that visa.
Right about 3 weeks after.
And that completely contradicts everything that his girlfriend had in WhatsApp messages from him.
Yeah, which we've now seen because she shared them with BuzzFeed News.
Yeah, so either that was him and he was lying to her on purpose to hide what he was really doing, or that was not him and someone else was talking to her.
Yeah.
Which the more that gets released, the more on that side of the fence I find myself thinking that she was not talking to him by then. He was no longer around by then.
That is possible.
It's highly possible that he might be dead.
Oh, at this point, it's pretty likely, I would say.
And then, of course, back to good old Roger Stone, Mr. Insane, Alex Jones' best friend.
Yep. Oh, yeah. It turns out it seems that some of the questioning that Mueller's team has been doing with interviews with people suggests that they are very interested in the interactions between him and Rick Gates, who of course was Manafort's guy that is now flipped. And of course, there's an obvious reason why they'd be interested in that sense. Of course, there's the lobbying firm Black Manafort, Stone, and Kelly that involved Paul Manafort and Roger Stone together for like decades.
And doing millions and millions of dollars worth of work for, the puppet Kiev government that Russia was kind of holding up until, that ended.
Yes.
And then Russia got really mad and invaded, various Ukrainian space.
Maybe a little.
Maybe a little. And a list of the questions that Mueller's been asking Trump's team was published by the New York Times. And that really upset Trump.
Of course, it's hilarious because it got leaked like right after Rudy Giuliani joined his team and after like months of them having these questions. So I think we all know which side it was that leaked these questions.
Yeah.
And it wasn't Mueller's team.
No.
So Trump is getting indignant about a thing that his own side did. Probably with his knowledge.
Yeah, he's really good at playing victim on Twitter.
Yeah. The questions themselves, though, which of course, Trump tweeted out all crazy things about how like there were no questions about collusion and blah blah blah.
And almost every question was about collusion in some way.
Right, and that part alone was just mind blowing. But we did actually get some interesting implications from a couple of the questions themselves. One of the questions specifically asked what communications Trump had with Michael Cohen, Felix Sater, and others, including foreign nationals, about Russian real estate developments during the campaign, which sounds like, based on other information we have, means that they want to know whether Trump is going to, lie to them about the discussions that they know were going on and who knew.
Interesting property purchases at very interesting valuations during the campaign.
Yes, and maybe discussions of possible real estate deals in Russia.
Indeed.
And then the other one that really stuck out, to my mind at least, was the question about what knowledge did you have of any outreach by your campaign, including by Paul Manafort, to Russia about potential assistance from the campaign. That is very interesting on two counts because it specifically has the implication that Paul Manafort reached out to Russia rather than it being the Russians reaching out. And then the idea that whether Trump had knowledge of Paul Manafort doing that outreach. So both of those are very interesting questions for them to want answers to in the first place.
So, yeah, we got just a continuing just windfall of information from, various investigations that are supposed to be really private. But because Trump's side just won't shut up, we know so much more. And
speaking of just won't shut up, Trump's Twitter feed this week. What the actual fuck? Like every story we've talked about, he's tweeted something out that just makes his own situation worse.
Yeah.
We had, regarding the Mueller list of questions, him tweeting out, quote, "So disgraceful, the questions concerning the Russian witch hunt were leaked to the media. No questions on collusion. Oh, I see. You have a made-up, phony crime, collusion, that never existed, and an investigation begun with illegally leaked classified information. Nice." And then followed that up with another tweet, quote, "It would seem very hard to obstruct justice for a crime that never happened. Witch hunt," end quote. Which I mean, both of those, there's like 7+ ways in which those two tweets are wrong. They're just wrong on like every single part.
I mean, the largest being that it is totally about Russian collusion, and all the questions were about Russian collusion in the end.
I mean, I would
Most
put a
of them
close
anyways.
second being it's very hard to obstruct justice for a crime that never happened, because no, impeding the investigation in the first place, whether there was an underlying crime, is 100% unquestionably obstruction. That is like not even a slightest question on anyone's mind if they know anything. But then like his tweets on other topics, he brought up the idea of whether it was allowed to, fire Comey for whatever reason he felt like. He tweeted, quote, "The questions are an intrusion into the president's Article 2 powers under the Constitution to fire any executive branch employee. What the president was thinking is outrageous and like supported basically a quote from, well, Joe DiGenova, saying that Trump could fire anyone at any time for any reason he wants. Which
of course isn't true.
No, because there's this whole thing about corrupt intent. It doesn't matter if you actually legally had the power to make that decision. If you made it for a reason that you weren't allowed to, it's still not a thing you're allowed to do.
Right.
He also then tweeted out a thing. A response to the Rudy Giuliani's initial statement. He made this long 3-part tweet where he basically backed up Giuliani's account of things in a 3-part tweet that was clearly not written by Trump, because it was actually coherent and sounded like it was attempted to be done in legalese. Not well done, but attempted. And said that, Mr. Cohen received a monthly retainer, not from the campaign and having nothing to do with the campaign, but it was a private contract and it was for an NDA, and these are very common, and it was all about false accusations made by Stormy Daniels. And then, despite already having a letter signed admitting there was no affair, and there was, nothing to do with money from the campaign or campaign contributions. This is basically the exact thing that Giuliani said the first time, which, of course, then all the legal experts were like, you just made everything worse for him. What were you? And then, as we said previously, the next day, Trump's like, oh, Giuliani didn't know what he was talking about. So, like, that's just his Twitter feed from this week. What? What part of this? Like, how is this the world we live in?
Because the GOP has done a very good job on their base of dumbing it down to a point where they would fall for all of the fake news and other things around the election that helped them vote in Donald Trump. If the GOP and the Republican Party hadn't spent 30 years actively and intentionally dumbing down their base and getting them to believe false stories through operations like Fox News itself,
Yes.
they would never have been able to get a Donald Trump elected.
That is actually 100% true. And I mean, we have the public, or in the public space are the records that prove all of this. I mean, Roger Ailes working with Nixon and talking about how, like, if they'd had a news station like putting out Nixon's line on things, then everything would have been fine. And then a decade later, they start up Fox News.
Yeah.
And then, the Powell memorandum back in the 70s talking about how, like, they need to undermine education because education is basically contrary to putting out all of their propaganda. And they need to, like, sell the idea that the colleges are all just, leftist propaganda.
Mind-blowing. I mean, although a lot of colleges are, it's not necessarily, a bad thing, because I guess we have to balance it somehow. At this point anyways.
Yeah, but I mean, like, so much of it is counterbalanced by, like, sure, there are departments at colleges and sometimes even in, relatively an entire college where that might be true. But then usually that college is part of a university or larger, like, private, like, liberal arts college or what have you, some sort of higher level of organization where they have other departments that are teaching, like, the critical thinking and, history and anthropology and the parts that undermine all of the propaganda aspects.
Beyond all of that, good old Donald Trump Jr. admits openly to violating the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Which, of course, is the act that most hackers and other, computer types get hit with for basically logging into things you're not allowed to.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked about the CFAA on the show before and how there's prosecutorial overreach about the very broad definitions they often apply to the phrasing of the CFAA.
CFAA was written in the 80s before the internet, and so they used a lot of broad language to describe terminology that now really should be cleaned up. It was written in response, funny enough, to the movie War Games that scared the shit out of some senators and made them think we needed a law to stop what happened in that movie from happening, even though what happened in that movie wasn't going to happen. But, they used very broad language when building it because they knew there would be a future in which a lot of this changed and grew fast. So I get the logic of using some broad language there. However, it should be rewritten nearly from scratch at this point.
Yeah. That being said, the thing that Donald Trump Jr. did, which we now know because...
he admitted to it publicly?
Well... there was an email that he sent out that ended up in the minority report of the House Intelligence Committee report on the investigation into Russian involvement in the 2016 election. And in it, he wrote to other top campaign officials for the Trump campaign, guys, I got a weird Twitter DM from WikiLeaks. See below. It's about this site, PutinTrump.org, that had been basically private. It was being developed by a PAC, and it had a login screen that you had to log in to get to. I assume it was probably an HTTP auth or something. And so they said, hey, in this DM, apparently, they send them like a password to the site that they guessed. They then said that they guessed. So he says, quote, I tried the password and it works. And the about section they referenced contains the next pick in terms of who is behind it. Not sure if this is anything, but it seems like it's really WikiLeaks asking me as I followed them, and it is a DM. And so he says that, he was told a guessed password to get into this site, and that he then went to the site and entered this password that he knew they weren't supposed to have, and that they literally guessed, because the password was, in fact, Putin Trump, to get in. And then he went to the site and put in this login to get in, knowing that they weren't authorized.
In a space that he wasn't allowed to. Unauthorized.
Which is expressly one of the things that the CFAA was intended from the start to be dealing with. This is an expressly unauthorized access of a computer system.
Under 18 USC 1030 which is part of the CFAA, quote, it is a misdemeanor to, quote, intentionally access a computer without authorization or exceeds authorized access and thereby obtain information from any protected computer. It's a little paraphrased, but all that language is there. And what they're saying is, if you log in to a machine that you were not given access to log into, but somehow guessed it, hacked it, whatever, you are committing a felony.
No, that one's a misdemeanor. But if it was committed for the purposes of commercial advantage or private financial gain, or in furtherance of any criminal or tortious act in violation of the Constitution or laws of the United States or of any state, then it could also be a felony under basically the next section. It's actually 1030C2B, but not A2, but, basically the next section down.
That's good stuff right there. Good stuff. Thanks, Trump Jr., for admitting to a felony.
And speaking of Trump Jr., that's not even the only news we had about him this week, because also thanks to the minority report from the House Intelligence Committee and some work done by BuzzFeed News, we now know that Trump Jr. continued to be in touch with Emin Agalarov and, to some extent, RS Agalarov throughout the campaign and into the transition after the campaign. We know that after the Trump Tower meeting in 2016, mid-June 2016, the attendees other than Manafort, Kushner, and Trump Jr. went to the bar in Trump Tower, where one of the attendees, Ike Kavalazad, the longtime Agalarov employee who attended the meeting, took a call from RS Agalarov Then the next day, Agalarov apparently had an expensive painting delivered to Trump as a birthday present, which we know because an email from Rod Goldstone to Rona Graff, the longtime personal assistant of Trump, had the subject line, quote, "birthday gift for Mr. Trump," end quote. And then a week later, we know that Trump Jr. wrote a thank you note. Seriously, this thank you note doesn't sound like something written by a Trump, but man, is it just like effusive in its praise. There are few things better than receiving a sensational gift from someone you admire, and that's what I've received from you. You made my birthday a truly special event by your thoughtfulness, not to mention your remarkable talent. I'm rarely at a loss for words, but right now I can only say how much I appreciate your friendship and to thank you for this fantastic gift. This is one birthday I'll always remember. And then after the election, between November 10th and December 13th, there was a series of messages between him and Agalarov and Trump Jr., culminating in a quick question on December 13th. And if all that wasn't enough, another email from Rob Goldstone to Rona Graff in late November after the election had this in part. Aris Agalarov has asked me to pass on this document in the hope it can be passed on to the appropriate team. And then it had an attachment containing the usual stuff talking about the Magnitsky Act, which, comes up a lot. I think everyone should be familiar with how that ties into everything at this point. And then the email was forwarded the same day from Rona Graff to Steve Bannon with a note at the top saying, the president-elect knows Aris well. Rob is his rep in the U.S. and sent this on. Not sure how to proceed, if at all. So wow. We know that these messages were being sent during the transition about, hey, you remember those sanctions thing that we had that meeting? We wanted you to deal with those sanctions. Hey, by the way, those sanctions. Yeah.
The thing that they say they didn't talk about.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it was all about adoption. Wait, shit, the adoption was specifically the Magnitsky Act, which was the sanctions. Fuck. They still admitted it.
It's absolutely crazy. And I'm sure, just going to get more and more little details on that one as time goes on.
Yeah. And 2 months from now, we'll have some little bit. And then a year from now, we'll have the fact that they were talking daily and Trump wakes up every morning to Vladimir Putin whispering in his ear.
So Trump lied about not staying overnight in Moscow during the 2013 Miss Universe pageant. And we know this. We know that he said to Comey, thanks to the Comey memos and now the Comey book, twice that he couldn't, the piss tape couldn't possibly be legitimate because because he had never stayed overnight in Russia. And we know this to be bullshit now.
Yeah. First of all, we already knew this to be bullshit because
Trump said it.
Well, yes, but while that was, probable cause for assuming it to be bullshit, we knew it was bullshit way back when Keith Schiller, his, longtime bodyguard and briefly chief of operations for the Oval Office when Trump first came into office, said that in testimony that he had a conversation at the Miss Universe pageant where a Russian businessman offered to send 5 women up to Trump's room. This was at this very pageant. And that, they said, we don't do business that way. And then that night on the way back to Trump's hotel room, they had a conversation where they laughed about the fact that the offer was made in the first place. And then Keith Schiller stood guard outside Trump's hotel room door for a while before going to bed himself, which plainly indicates that Trump was in his hotel room for long enough for his bodyguard to go to sleep for the night.
Yep.
So we already knew it was wrong. But now we also have the flight records showing when the planes took off and landed, and we now know that Trump he landed in Moscow on November 8th and didn't take off until almost 4 a.m. on November 10th.
Boy, that sounds like overnight to me.
Yeah, that sounds distinctly like overnight.
So Trump lying to Comey on multiple occasions about staying overnight in Moscow, which again, more interesting than anything else, just starts to add more credence to more pieces of the Steele dossier, and that everything they used to attack it is turning out to be false.
Yeah.
And so far, every claim that we've been able to verify out of it has been verified as true. And that is just, it's interesting.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And I mean, what's the ration? I mean, okay, Trump lies like people breathe. He doesn't really need a reason to lie from what we can tell. He just seems to do it naturally. But I don't understand what other rationale there is for telling that lie. Like if the tape isn't true, it's just like such a petty and potentially falsifiable detail that undermines your case if your story is true. It's the kind of thing that someone comes up with as a shitty alibi that the police then find out isn't true, and then later on in court that person gets charged for that exact thing because they're able to prove that the person was lying the whole time.
Crazy talk. So now we are. This is just strange, man.
Yeah, speaking of crazy talk.
So Trump's team robbed his former doctor. They just went into the offices and stole materials that they, in some regards might have had some kind of right to, and in others had no right to. It's
certainly not in the way they did it.
Not in the way they did it. And so his former doctor, Bornstein, who
was the weird hippie looking dude that wrote the letter about how Trump was like, I could unequivocally say greatest, healthiest president of all time, blah, blah, blah.
Which we now know he didn't write. And in fact, Trump dictated it to him and then he just signed it.
And embellished a few medical details.
Right, because he specifically told that live on CNN.
Yes, he said that this week, in fact. Another thing.
But
yeah, that guy. Apparently, in early February of 2017, the Trump Organization's chief legal officer, Keith Schiller, and, quote, another large man, came into his office in what he describes as a raid and just seized all of Trump's medical records, which is like super illegal. That is a violation of HIPAA requirements. It's a violation of medical record preservation requirements in the state of New York. Like there's just all kinds of stuff just you can't go into someone's office and like seize documentation from them by force, even if you theoretically like have a legitimate right to get copies of that documentation.
Correct. And that's exactly what they did because he is obviously above the law.
Does anyone remember that time that OJ went to prison a few years back for breaking into a hotel room to seize things that he claimed were his own legitimate belongings? And that like legally that didn't matter because he broke into a hotel room to seize them. This is the same idea.
It's insanity. So they steal all of that. The doctor then goes to talk to CNN and tells us, oh, yeah, I didn't write that note. Trump dictated it. I just kind of signed it. Yeah, that's wonderful.
Oh, we did get the hilarious response from Sarah Huckabee Sanders when asked about this raid, though, where she said, quote, it would be standard procedure for a newly elected president's records to be in possession by the White House medical unit. And that was what was taking place, is those records were being transferred over to the White House medical unit as requested, end quote. Which it's hilarious because, apparently this is a tacit admission by her that the standard procedure for Trump and his team is to act like a bunch of mafia thugs, which I don't disagree with. It's just a very interesting admission on her part.
Yeah. Now, our favorite environmental scumbag, Scott Pruitt, currently head of the VPA while also hating everything the EPA is supposed to stand for.
And having a history of suing the EPA to try to get them to stop doing all the things they're supposed to.
So as he continues to make the mistakes that we all expected him to make at the top of this organization, his aides are now starting to leave, all of his aides, because they are scared as admissions of all of the problems going on there start coming public. And more scrutiny starts happening, and he might end up getting fired over it.
There's a whole bunch of investigations that
they are running.
Yeah, we're now up to, our notes say 3, but we're actually up to at least 4 at this point.
It's
in this week.
Yeah, there's 170 Democratic lawmakers and 4 Republicans have asked for his ouster.
And there are at least 10 known formal investigations into him.
So we get to just watch as he falls down. I mean, there's so much, there's so much about the condo in DC and so much about how all the lobbyists are helping him and how lobbyists are arranging his trips. And I mean, it's just
the lobbyist that owned the condo was trying to get people jobs at the EPA and just like all of the just completely unsubtle.
none of it is subtle. And I mean, it speaks to a much larger problem in the space for what lobbyists are doing here. But it's hard for me to care much more than others saying that the lobbying problem in this country is horrendous, that it needs to be in check, and that people like Scott Pruitt and the power he is currently abusing are a direct result of it.
Yes.
And I mean, it's a much bigger problem than just Scott Pruitt.
Of course, he is just this example of it all coming out.
Prime example. Wow. The amount of notes we have on this one, I'm gonna kind of skip past the condo.
Yeah, there's the condo. There was the Morocco trip. There was him buying a house with a lobbyist. Yeah,
they actually bought a house together to share when they were in town.
That was like 15 years ago too.
Yeah,
that's how long he's been doing this shit. He was a state senator at the time.
I mean, he's that friendly with the lobbyists that they own property together. So he needs to go. Everyone should be pressuring their senators and their various lawmakers to get rid of Scott Pruitt, especially people in the Republican districts who actually, have people who have not come out publicly yet.
Yes.
Which is most of them, because only 4 have.
Right.
So some more fun with Trump's legal team.
Oh, yeah. All kinds of stuff this week.
Cobb.
Gone right after, his statement that it's certainly not off the table and people are working hard to make decisions or work towards an interview with the Mueller team.
45 minutes later, Cobb was gone.
But not to worry. He was retiring from the president's legal team. And according to Sarah Huckabee Sanders, for several weeks he's been discussing his retirement. And last week he let Chief of Staff Kelly know he'd be retiring at the end of the month. And Cobb himself has insisted that he's done what he came to do in terms of managing the White House response to the special counsel requests. So clearly this was 100% voluntary and no way directly related to him saying that a interview was a thing that could happen.
It's just literally mind-blowing here.
And of course, Giuliani is coming on to the team, but he's not the only one joining the team. Well, Ty Cobb
Flood.
Yeah, the guy that represented Bill Clinton when he was being impeached. Man, I wonder why they might be bringing him on.
Maybe they need a lawyer for when the president gets impeached.
And I wonder why a guy who's famous for taking cases where the president gets impeached might have taken the case with a client that's known to not take legal advice to do things that might get his attorneys disbarred and then not pay the bill.
Maybe he knows something we don't know.
Maybe he doesn't give a shit about actually getting paid for this case, and this is just like the best PR he could ever have for his niche.
Right? I mean, it's a very, very, very small niche. I gotta tell you.
He can write that one book he can write based off of this, and he could write like 3 just from having taken this. That one book, though, will just he never has to work again.
And McGahn is leaving.
Yes. Officially, what we know is that Don McGahn and Trump are barely on speaking terms unless absolutely needed. And that privately, we're hearing that Don McGahn wants out and is looking to leave. And in fact, is the one who is the reason that Emmett Flood is being brought in, because they want to replace Don McGahn with Emmett Flood, and this was McGahn's idea. He wanted an ally to replace him, and that he saw as someone that was very much of the same mind as him.
I mean, it is interesting because, for all I hate most of these people at the top, Emmett Flood is definitely a better lawyer than McGahn. Yeah,
I mean, McGahn doesn't seem to be outright a grossly incompetent lawyer the way everyone else involved in this show is the Trump team has proven
Ty
to be.
Cobb or Rudy Giuliani.
Exactly. He's the guy that actually was like, Mr. President, you can't fire the special counsel, and if you try, I resign. So he seems to, be at least that minimal level of competence that you should expect from a lawyer. So you can see why A, he wants the fuck out.
Yeah, he's running too.
B, well, he's like, bring in the guy that's the impeachment specialist.
Now, John Kelly might have called Trump an idiot, and might have said we've got to save him from himself.
And said that, you know, John Kelly is the one saving the country and that Trump has no idea what the fuck he's doing.
And John Kelly, of course, denies using the word idiot. But we know how this goes. More sources have said that he said it than have said that he didn't.
Hey, some of them...
More trustworthy ones.
Some of them didn't say that he didn't express the sentiment, but they contradicted whether he used the word idiot.
Right. But everyone knew the intent of, what he was saying.
There are definitely anonymous sources like, he didn't say idiot.
Oh, man. And of course, Flynn met with Kislyak another time that we're now learning about.
Although this is kind of funny because, well, first of all, this meeting was just about a week before the Russia Today dinner in Moscow. But the thing that's funny about it is that the reason we learned about it is somehow the completely useless majority report of the House Intelligence Committee run by the Republicans, the gist of the report was, we have investigated ourselves to our full satisfaction, and we found that we have done nothing wrong. But somehow, despite this report basically being a worthless joke, it just happened to include this. Like, oh, by the way, Flynn met with Sergei Kislyak another time right before he went to Moscow.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, also, by the way, it was arranged at the request of either Flynn or Flynn Jr., and then Flynn Jr. subsequently described the meeting in an email to the Russian embassy as, quote, very productive, end quote.
Indeed. And, you know, just to toss this out there so it's not just all piling on the Trump campaign, any of you Jill Stein supporters out there might want to ask her why she was there.
Yeah, you should probably want to know the answer to that.
You know, why? I mean, you know, who knows? Maybe she's got a good reason. But, you know, I would love an answer. So, you know, maybe someone asks her. Because the news doesn't really care that she was there.
No. I mean, to be fair, the news just doesn't care about Jill Stein.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have more revelations regarding Trump Tower.
Oh, yeah.
And the Veselnitskaya's government connections.
Yeah. Now, I mean, remember a few months ago when Natalia Veselnitskaya was writing to, like, the Senate Justice Committee saying, I have no relationship with Mr. Chaika, his representatives, and his institutions other than those related to my professional functions as a lawyer. That was just like a few months ago. Well, now she's actively telling NBC News, quote, I'm a lawyer and I'm an informant. Since 2013, I have been actively communicating with the Office of the Russian Prosecutor General, which is, of course, Yuri Chaika, aka the master of compromat. And we already knew that she had a personal relationship with Yuri Chaika, and she'd actually acknowledged that one. But now she's just outright saying, oh, yeah, by the way, I'm an informant for them. Oh, by the way, also, we now have internal emails showing that she privately worked with the Prosecutor General's office to undermine a request from the Justice Department to get them to hand over bank, tax, and court records in regards to Russian firm Prevzon Holdings, which she was the attorney for and is very well connected to the Russian government through its owner, Denis Katsev. And that they actually supported her in her efforts, despite the U.S. Justice Department not only asking for these records, but asking them to keep the request confidential. And she was like communicating with them behind the scenes, like, by the way, so I know you guys got this request from them. Here, let me help you craft the response in which you'll say no. That actually happened. She was
amazing.
The one helping to write that. But that's not even the end of what we learned about the Trump Tower meeting. Because now we know, thanks to Adam Schiff on CNN, that Veselnitskaya reached out to the Trumps after the election, asking them to follow up on repealing the Magnitsky Act sanctions, which is literally, we now have the quid and the quo of quid pro quo. They took a meeting expecting to get dirt on Hillary Clinton in regards to the 2016 election. And exchange, they talked about the adoption matter, aka the Magnitsky Act sanctions. And then after Trump won the election, they contacted Trump like, so you remember that thing? Well, how about those sanctions?
That's kind of cut and dry there. That's kind of right to the point. Like, there we go. Here's
what more could you possibly need there?
Prosecutors with a backbone.
I mean, I assume there
a
is
U.S. population that wouldn't have voted this person in the first place.
Yeah.
A system that didn't prop up only two powerful parties. Lots of things I want. Lots of things I want.
You have a point.
You know, so one of the other fun things about the right that we are learning is how the Koch brothers influence universities,
which we've known to some extent for years. We knew about the the donor agreements that they had with Florida State University back in the mid 2010s, because, well, there were a bunch of news stories between about 2014 and 2016 about how in exchange for some donations of a couple $1 million, basically, the Kochs got say over who was getting hired and fired there. Well, for a long time, it's been alleged that George Mason University has been doing the same thing. George Mason has vehemently denied this. It should be noted that George Mason is, of course, the largest public university in Virginia and has a very prominent law school and economics school. And that their economics school is very, very hard right-wing. They are not simply right-wing. They are basically the only university that anyone would even call a real university in the United States where you can find economists from the Austrian School of Economics, which isn't actually a school of economics. It's a pseudoscience and doesn't, aside from some of its originators originally being from Austria, it doesn't really have that much to do with Austria itself these days. But it is a outright pseudoscience. They do not believe in empirical evidence outright. This is the one school where somehow these people all get hired. What a coincidence, right? Well, now, thanks to some people putting in a lot of work and filing a number of Freedom of Information Act requests, which were denied, and then taking them to court, winning, getting them to actually agree to release the information. Now, we have all these funding deals between about 2003 and 2011 that George Mason University made with the Koch Foundation. And it turned out that in exchange for some fairly substantial donations, they were going to do some things like they were going to endow funds to pay for professors at the Mercatus Center, which is the free market think tank associated with the Department of Economics at GMU. And in exchange, what was going to happen was that they would create 5-member selection committees to choose professors to work there, and that the Koch Foundation would outright get to pick 2 of the members. Also, similar things would happen with advisory boards that could recommend firing professors.
So basically, the Koch brothers were buying the ability to choose which professors worked at George Mason University.
And now, as I said, for a long time, George Mason had denied there were these kinds of strings attached. Well, now that this is coming out, GMU's president, who's been the president for not during the period of those specific agreements, but has certainly been the president for a while now, and there's no way didn't know about those agreements, issued a statement acknowledging that the agreements, quote, fall short of the standards of academic independence I expect any gift to meet, and that they, quote, raise questions concerning donor influence in academic matters, but then insisted that they didn't give donors control over academic decisions because, it's only 40% of the say they got outright. And whoever, agreed to that in the first place gets to pick the other 3 seats.
Yeah.
Clearly no influence.
Whoever wants another donation in the future, gets to go along with that 40% and, make it 100%.
And then, interestingly, we got a statement from Bethany Lediak, who is the president of GMU's chapter of the American Association of University Professors, who, as the representative of professors at the school, essentially commented, "It is now abundantly clear that the administration of Mason, in partnership with the Mercatus Center and private donors, violated principles of academic freedom, academic control, and ceded faculty governance to private donors." And then also said, quote, "These are all gross violations of academic freedom. Faculty hiring and faculty retention are not the business of donors in any way, shape, or form," which I mean, I don't know what to add on that count because that's just right. That's why
Yeah.
you like nailed it. Of course, the Koch Foundation insists that they never wanted this kind of control and that the new agreements totally don't include things like this, blah, 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 which is real plausible. They've totally evolved over time. And it's not like they wanted this kind of say. Why, I'm sure the university just offered it. It's not like they requested it or ever exercised it. Oh, also, meanwhile, we now know that there were emails exchanged between the dean of George Mason University's law school and the executive VP of the Federalist Society, Leonard Leo, in 2015, discussing hiring and firing decisions at GMU's law school, which it comes right around the time that in 2016, early the next year, in exchange for a $10 million donation from the Kochs and a $20 million anonymous donation, the GMU School of Law was renamed the Antonin Scalia Law School.
Wow.
So, yeah, totally. They are not looking for any kind of influence over hiring or firing decisions. And I'm sure that $10 million donation from the Kochs there had nothing. It was expressly contingent on them renaming the school, but I'm sure didn't include anything about faculty decisions.
None at all. I find it really interesting that every time we kind of hear about colleges in this kind of regard, it's the right claiming that all the colleges are left-leaning and spitting out Democrats. And you don't find any real strong, large Democratic donors forcing that on the colleges.
No.
It's just fact-based teaching turns you into a critical thinker. But in any way they need to actually get the Republican side out there, they have to force it with millions of dollars of funding down people's throats to get anyone to believe their side because, well, it's wrong.
It's also very interesting because they're always like, they believe very strongly in science, except, we know
They don't.
that just isn't true. But then you look at like the fields that they attack, and it's anthropology, history, sociology, psychology, biology, physics,
All the things you teach in college.
all of them. And then they're always insisting that these are all leftist conspiracies. But then you look and it's just those fields. That's literally just what the consensus of evidence in those fields shows.
Yep.
And then you look at the ones where people are like, but the right-wing guys are literally paying for this. And it's economics and law, and all of the economists that are like doing that don't necessarily agree with broader economists. And then the broader economists still, anytime their field like comes into intersection with these other fields like anthropology and history, usually the anthropologists and the historians and stuff are like, these guys have no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah, none.
And it's like, so if you're going to talk credibility there, well, I got to go with the ones that are, not the ones attacking physics.
Yeah, if you're attacking actual facts that we can prove, you might have a problem.
Like everything we know about history has to be wrong for you to be right, then you're not right.
Yeah, period. Good times there. So, if you go to GMU, revolt, overthrow your leadership, and do other horrible things. I won't tell you to do things like burn down all the buildings because, I'd probably be incitement or something if you did it. I would laugh if it happened. I'm just not telling you to do it.
Yes.
So anyways, that is show 55. The shit show continues.
Expect more next week when this much happens again.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you for listening. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at GreggHoush Show and on Instagram at GreggHoush. If you like what you've heard and want to be a part of it, check out patreon.com/GreggHoush Show. In exchange for funding our programming, you gain access to exclusive content such as uncut editions of our podcast. We have new episodes every Thursday night. We hope you listen in. The GreggHoush Show was created by GreggHoush, executive produced by co-host Eric Gaures, and co-hosted by Kayla Avery. Other contributors include producer and writer Anna Jeffrey, co-host producer David McGuffin, and writer-engineer Robert Tortora. Theme music for this show was produced and recorded by Geneva de Colbert. Our interns include co-host Casey McLaughlin, writer-engineer Alec Greeny, writer Maddie LoCicero, and associate producer, writer, and announcer William Kennedy. You're listening to New Revolutionary Radio, your call to action.